The girl had gone 2 days on a heel of bread and mouthfuls of snow. And even so, the first thing she did when she saw the old man on the corner of Barton and Ferry, losing his grip on a splitting paper sack, was cross the road toward him and say, "I've got that one. It's about to go." Nobody else on the block turned ahead. It was the kind of November afternoon in the north end of Hamilton, when the wind came off the harbor with knives in it, and people walked with their chins tucked into their collars and their eyes on the salt-crusted sidewalk in front of them, and a small girl in a coat 2 sizes too big, speaking to a white-haired stranger in a good gray overcoat, was exactly the sort of thing a person here had learned to walk past. The way you learn to walk past. A hurt you can't afford to stop for. But the girl, Etta Doyle, 9 years old, and so thin the knobs of her wrists showed through her cuffs, did not know that the man leaning on a cane outside Halloran's grocery was worth more than every house, every shop, every parked car on the whole street put together. She only knew he was old. She only knew the sack was tearing. She only knew that helping somebody, even when you yourself had nothing left to give, was the thing her mother had told her in the last good week they had, that she must never let the world talk her out of. That one small choice, made in the flat gray light outside a corner store that had stood on that spot for 41 years, set something moving that the girl could not have imagined, and that the old man had long since stopped hoping for. Before this goes any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if quiet stories like this one stay with you. The subscribe button is right down there. The neighborhood had a way of looking gray even when the sun was up. It settled into the brick of the old row houses and the low industrial sheds down by the water, and the chain link that leaned at tired angles along the empty lots, into the faces of the people waiting at the bus shelter with their hands shoved deep in thin pockets. The wind rattled the loose aluminum trim on the corner buildings. It sent an empty Tim Hortons cup skittering along the gutter in long, lazy circles. It found every open seam in every coat and reminded a person that winter had not come. Winter was already here, and it had unpacked its bags. Halloran sat where Barton bent toward the harbor, its front window fogged from the warmth inside, a hand-lettered sign in the glass promising fresh bread on Thursdays. The door opened and shut all afternoon with the tired jingle of a bell that had needed replacing since the 80s, and each time it opened a breath of cold slid in past whoever was coming through. Etta had been standing across from that door for the better part of an hour, hands drawn up into her sleeves, watching. Her runners were a size too large and stuffed at the toes with folded flyer paper so they wouldn't drag off her heels when she moved quickly, and she had learned to move quickly. She was not there to steal. Her mother, before she got sick, before the whole small, careful life they had built came apart in a single winter, had told her that stealing was a door you could open only once, and after that it never closed all the way again. She was only watching in case somebody set a bag down for a second too long, or dropped a loonie in the slush, or left a bun on the bench by the door. Hope was a thing you had to hold loosely. She had learned that, too. Squeeze it, and it came apart in your fist like wet snow. She had been on her own, more or less, for 19 days. Her Nan, who had taken her in after the funeral, had fallen on the ice outside the building in early November and been moved to a place up on the mountain where they could keep an eye on her hip, and the worker from the agency had said there would be a placement, a family, a plan, a bed somewhere warm and temporary. But the days had stretched thin and no one had come, so Etta had stopped sleeping at the apartment. She was afraid that if she stayed in one spot too long, somebody in a lanyard would knock, and she would end up in a car going somewhere she didn't get a say about, the way her cousins had, years back, and never come home from. She kept the key to the apartment on a shoelace around her neck, under her shirt, even though she couldn't make herself go back and sleep there. Some nights, she rode the buses to keep warm and got off before the driver noticed she'd been on too long. Some nights she sat in the 24-hour laundromat on Ottawa Street until the woman who ran it, who never said anything, quietly slid a warm dryer sheet across the counter toward her, which meant she could stay. The old man had come out of Halloran's with 2 sacks and no free hand for the cane he still needed, and one of the sack, bust the bottom soft with a leaked carton of something, had begun to give. Etta was across the road before she'd decided to be. "It's the corner," she said, already reaching. "The bottom corner. If you tip it that way, it'll dump. Here." The old man looked down at her. His name was Everett Langdon, and though the girl had no way of knowing it, that name had appeared for the better part of 4 decades in the business pages of every paper in the country. He had started with a single leased truck and a route hauling parts between 2 plants in the East End in 1974. And the company that grew out of it, freight, then warehousing, then a whole quiet network of logistics that moved things people used every day without ever wondering how they got there, had made him one of the wealthiest men in the province. He had been asked twice to sit for magazine profiles and had said no both times, because he did not like his picture taken and did not think a man's money was the most interesting thing about him. He came back to Halloran's every November, on the anniversary of a day he never spoke about, and bought his groceries there and paid cash and let the owner's grandson bag them slowly, because it was the store his own mother had sent him to, as a boy. A nickel in his mitten, when this street had been full and loud and alive, and because standing in it for 20 minutes was the closest he could still get to a woman who had been gone for 60 years. He looked at the girl's face. He looked at it the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find. Her lips had gone a faint blue at the edges. There was a raw pink chap across both cheeks. Her eyes were doing a thing he recognized and had hoped never to see on a child again. They were doing arithmetic, weighing him, working out, in a fraction of a second, whether he was safe, whether he was worth the effort, whether there was anything in this for her, and deciding there wasn't, offering anyway. "Thank you," he said. He let her take the failing sack. "You've a good eye. That was about to come apart on the sidewalk, and I'd have been chasing oranges into traffic." "You've got to hold it from underneath," Etta said, gathering it against her chest. "Not the top. The top's just paper." "So it is." A car idled a little way up the block, long and dark, exhaust curling white in the cold. A man in a dark coat stood beside it, watching without seeming to. "Where am I taking these, then, since you've adopted them?" "I don't care," said Etta, and then, because her mother had raised her better than the last 3 weeks had, "wherever you need." "Sir," they walked. It was not far, only to the car, but Everett walked slowly, and the girl matched him without being asked, which he noticed. He noticed a great many things by then. He noticed that she carried the sack the way you carry something you mean to give back and not keep. He noticed that her coat had once belonged to a boy, and before that to someone the coat had long outlived. He noticed the flyer paper at the toes of her runners. He noticed, most of all, that she had not once looked at the car, the way a child will look at a thing she wants, and that the not looking was a discipline, a thing she had practiced, and that a 9-year-old should not yet have had cause to practice it. At the car, the man in the dark coat, whose name was Gordon and who had driven Everett Langdon for 19 years and could read the back of his employer's neck like weather, opened the trunk. Etta set the sacks in as gently as if they held something breakable and stepped back onto the curb, out of the way, hands finding her sleeves again. "Thank you," she said and turned to go. "What's your name?" Everett asked. "Not Sharp. The way you'd ask a grown person you'd been introduced to at a table." She stopped. She could have run. She thought about running. But there was something in the way he'd asked. Not down at her, not soft and syrupy the way adults got when they were performing kindness for an audience of one, but level plain as if her name were simply a thing worth knowing that held her there on the salted concrete. "Etta," she said. "Everett," he said, and put out his hand, the leather glove creaking, and shook hers once gravely as if a contract had been signed. "That's a fine old name. Etta what?" "Doyle." He nodded, filing it somewhere. "It's a long walk for a small person on a day like this, Etta Doyle. Have you far to go?" And there it was. The question under the question. She heard it. She had heard it from the worker, and from the woman at the shelter intake desk, and from a bus driver once, and every time it had come with a form attached, or a phone call, or a car going somewhere. She took a step back. "Not far," she said. Everett let it sit. He did not chase it. He looked out over her head at the shuttered storefront next to Halloran's, where a tailor had been when he was a boy, and where now brown paper covered the glass from the inside. When he spoke again, it was about nothing. "Gordon and I are having supper in a bit," he said, as though remarking on the cold. "A place over on Ottawa Street. A friend of mine runs it. Nothing fancy. Soup and bread and whatever Bianca's decided we're eating, which we don't get a vote on. I'd be glad of the company." He paused. He did not lean down. He did not lower his voice. "You're under no obligation whatever. Gordon can drive you wherever it is you're headed, and no supper about it, if that's what suits you. I only thought I'd ask since you saved my oranges." Etta stood very still. The wind pushed at the back of her neck. Her stomach, which she had kept quiet all afternoon by an act of pure will, turned over hard at the word soup and betrayed her, and she was certain he'd heard it. And her face went hot with the shame of being hungry in front of a stranger who could tell. She thought about the key on the shoelace under her shirt. She thought about the folded square of paper in her inside pocket, the one her mother had drawn for her the winter before she died. A little house with 2 windows and smoke coming out of the chimney and a dog in the yard. A house they were going to have. Someday, her mother had said, once things turned. She thought about her mother saying, "Be careful of strangers," and her mother also saying, in the same breath, that half the strangers in the world were only neighbors she hadn't met yet, and that you could usually tell which was which by whether they asked you a question and then actually waited for the answer. This one had waited. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out small, but it did not shake. "Yes, thank you, sir." Everett nodded once, the way a man nods when a small and important thing has been settled, and gestured to the open door, where warm air was spilling out onto the frozen street, carrying the smell of leather and clean wool. Etta hesitated at the door the way you hesitate at the edge of cold water, and then she got in. The seat was wider than her Nan's Chesterfield. The leather was warm, actually warm, warm from underneath, and it took her a full block to work out that the car was heating the seats on purpose, for no reason but that a person might be comfortable while they waited. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and tried not to touch anything she didn't need to touch. Gordon pulled away from the curb, and Etta watched the north end slide past the window in a way it never had before. From inside a car like this, the broken pavement didn't bite at her heels. The wind couldn't reach her. The neighborhood looked smaller and somehow kinder, though she knew it was the same street it had always been, and that nothing about it had changed except the glass between her and it. "Gordon," Everett said, "the emerald, please. And tell Bianca we're three, and that one of us is a young lady who knows how to carry a bag properly, which is more than I can say for the two of us." "Yes, sir," said Gordon, and caught the girl's eye in the mirror, and gave her a small smile that asked nothing of her. The emerald sat between a shuttered video shop and a store that sold nothing anyone could identify from the window, on a stretch of Ottawa Street that had been the beating heart of the neighborhood once, and was, on this evening, mostly dark. Inside it was small and gold-lit and smelled so strongly of bread that Etta's eyes stung. A broad woman with flour on her forearms. Bianca, who had run the place for 30 years and had fed half the North End on credit at one time or another and never mentioned it, took one look at Etta over Everett's shoulder, took in the coat and the runners and the pink-chapped cheeks and the careful, watchful stillness of her, and did not say a single word about any of it. She said only, "There's a booth by the radiator. It's the warm one. Sit there," and steered the girl to it with a hand that did not quite touch her shoulder. What came was tomato soup, thick, with a swirl of cream, and bread still warm enough to melt the butter, and Etta ate the way a person eats who has taught herself not to, in small, careful spoonfuls, forcing herself to slow, because if you ate fast on an empty stomach it came back up. She'd learned that, too. And she was not going to be sick in front of this man in this warm gold room after he'd been kind to her. Everett saw all of it. He ate his own soup slowly to keep her company at the pace, and he talked, easily, about nothing that required her to answer. About the tailor who'd been next to Halloran's when he was a boy. About a dog he'd had once that could open the icebox. About how Bianca's mother had made the same bread, in the same oven, and had thrown a wooden spoon at him once for stealing a roll, 40-odd years back. He built her a small warm room out of talk and let her rest inside it, and asked her nothing at all until the soup was gone and the color had come back into her face. Then, over the last of the bread, quietly, not looking straight at her, he said, "And your mother, Etta, is she waiting on you somewhere tonight?" The girl went still. She looked down at the table. For a moment, the whole warm room seemed to hold its breath, and then she said, in a voice gone flat and careful the way children's voices go when they are protecting the last soft thing they have, "She passed. In the spring." "I'm sorry," Everett said. He did not fill the silence after it. He let it be true. "And your dad never had one. Not really." She turned the spoon over. "There was my Nan. But she fell and they took her up the mountain, and I'm not allowed up there. And there's supposed to be a lady coming with a place for me, but she hasn't come. And it's been." She stopped. She had said more than she'd meant to. The warmth had loosened something. "I'm fine," she said too quickly. "I've been managing." And Everett Langdon, 68 years old, who had negotiated across tables with men whose signatures moved markets, who had not raised his voice in anger in 30 years, because he had learned it was never necessary, sat in a vinyl booth on Ottawa Street and felt the floor of his chest give way beneath a thing he had spent a lifetime keeping the lid on. Because he had been this girl. Not the details were his own to carry, but the shape of it, the watchful arithmetic, the carrying of a thing you meant to give back and not keep, the discipline of not looking at what you wanted. A long time ago on this street, in a colder winter than this one, a boy had gone hungry and had had exactly one adult stop and see him and not one more, and everything Everett Langdon had built in the 60 years since had been, though he'd never have said it aloud, an argument with that winter. He took a plain white card from his breast pocket. It had a name on it and a phone number and nothing else. No company, no title, no logo. He set it on the table and slid it across with 2 fingers. "That number rings a phone that a person answers," he said, "day or night. If you ring it and say your name is Etta Doyle and you carried my groceries, whoever answers will know exactly who you are and will help you with whatever you need. No forms, no lanyard, no car you didn't ask for. You don't owe me a thing for it. You never will." He held her eyes. "But I'd like to make you an offer, and I'd like you to feel entirely free to say no. My wife and I have a house east of the city, and a room in it with a good radiator and a window that latches, that no one is sleeping in. It's yours tonight if you want it, and only if you want it. Gordon can take you back to wherever you've been keeping warm instead, and I won't ask a single question about where that is. Both are fine. It's your call, not mine. Etta looked at the card. She looked at the old man. She looked at Gordon, who had drifted a few feet off and was studying the dessert menu he'd read 1,000 times. She thought about the laundromat and the buses and the key on the shoelace and the cold that got into your bones by 3 in the morning and stayed there till noon. She thought about her mother saying you can tell by whether they waited for the answer. He had waited every single time. The window latches? She asked. It was, she would understand much later, the only question that had mattered to her that whole terrible autumn. Not whether the bed was soft. Whether the room could be closed from the inside. From the inside, Everett said. I'll show you the latch myself, and then I'll leave you be. Okay, Etta said. Yes. The drive east took longer than the drive to the Emerald had, because the house was not in the city at all. It was past the last of the suburbs, past exits Etta had only ever seen as names on the highway signs from a bus window. Out onto a dark 2-lane road lined with old trees that had been standing there since before any of the 3 of them had been born. The street lights gave way to porch lights, and the porch lights gave way to long stretches of nothing but the moon lying flat and silver on the frozen fields. Etta didn't say anything for most of it. Everett didn't push her to. Once, when her head began to sink toward the warm leather, Gordon turned the heat up a single degree without being asked and without a word. The house, when they reached it, was not the sort of house she'd have pictured a rich man living in. It was long and low, and made of gray fieldstone, with warm yellow light in the downstairs windows and a wreath of dried wheat on the door tied with one red ribbon. A woman was waiting in the front hall, small, with iron gray hair cut plain, and a face that had been kind for so long that the kindness had gone and settled permanently into the lines of it. Her name was Ruth, and Everett had been married to her for 41 years, and she had known from the single line he'd sent ahead from the car, bringing a young guest the good room, don't fuss, everything that mattered, and had done exactly as told. She did not fuss. She did not crouch down and put on a voice. She looked at Etta the way you'd look at any traveler come in late out of the cold, and said, "You'll be Etta. The room's made up and the radiator's been on an hour, so it's warm. Are you hungry, or are you tired?" "Tired," Etta admitted, and realized as she said it that she was more tired than she had let herself be in 3 weeks, a bone tiredness that had been waiting behind a door she'd been leaning against with her whole small weight. "Then that's easy," Ruth said, and showed her up. Everett came as far as the doorway of the room, no farther. He pointed out the latch on the window and the bolt on the door and told her which was which. And then he said good night and went, and she heard his cane and his slow tread go off down the hall, and she turned the bolt and stood a moment with her hand on it. And then she crossed to the window and turned the latch too. And only then, with the door and the window both closed from the inside, and no one able to come in that she had not let in, did Etta Doyle lie down on a bed with clean cold sheets that went warm around her and cry quietly. The way you cry when the things you've been carrying finally get set down. And sleep for 14 hours. That was the beginning of it. And it did not end there, because real things rarely do. It went on through the hard part of the winter and out the far side into spring. There were no cameras on the corner of Barton and Ferry that afternoon and no story in the paper. And not one person in the city of Hamilton knew that one of the wealthiest men in the province had bought his groceries at a family store on the North End and let a hungry child carry his bag, and then quietly rearranged the whole architecture of his last years around her. Everett's lawyers, patient, discreet people who had learned long ago that their employer's largest transactions were often the ones that never appeared on any ledger, found Etta's Nan up on the mountain and got her the surgery on her hip that the waitlist had been quietly deferring, and got her into a place with a real physiotherapist and a window that looked at something green. They untangled the agency file that had been sitting in a drawer and made it so that Etta became her grandmother's ward-in-law, with Everett and Ruth named as guardians should the old woman not be able to manage, which, for a good while, she couldn't. Etta went back to school, a different school, a quiet one, where she was allowed to be silent and was not asked, in front of a class, questions she had no way to answer. She kept the plain white card in the inside pocket of a new coat that fit her at the shoulders, in the same pocket where she kept the folded drawing of the little house, with 2 windows and the dog in the yard. She kept the key on the shoelace, too, for a long time, even after there was nothing on the other end of it worth going back to. And then one spring she took it off, and she and Ruth planted it under a lilac by the stone wall, which was Ruth's idea. and which Etta never told anyone about, because some things are not for telling. She did not thank Everett often, because he plainly did not want it, and would change the subject the moment it came near. But she watched him over the years the way a child watches the one adult who turned out to be safe, and she learned a great deal from the watching. She learned that he tipped in cash and never made a show of it. She learned that he answered his own door. She learned that on the November anniversary he did not speak of, he still went to Halloran's and bought groceries he didn't need and stood in the aisle for 20 minutes, and that after the first year he took her with him and she carried the bags. And neither of them ever once said out loud what the carrying was for. Everett Langdon lived a good deal longer than his doctors had told him he would, the way stubborn men sometimes do once they've found a reason to stay put. He saw Etta finish grade 8. He saw her get taller than Ruth and then taller than him, which delighted him out of all proportion. He saw her accepted into a university on a scholarship that he had quietly arranged, and that she did not learn was arranged until she was clearing out his desk years later and found the file, by which time it was too late to be angry, and there was only the ache of being loved more carefully than she'd been allowed to know. He did not see her graduate. He died on a February night in the low stone house, with Ruth holding one of his hands and a grown Etta in the chair beside the bed reading aloud, at his request, from a book he'd given her the first winter. The two of them getting to the end of a chapter before either of them understood that the reading had become the only thing keeping the room from being silent. In the drawer of his desk there was an envelope, with her name on it, in his hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and it was short because he had always distrusted long documents about simple things. Etta, it said. 2 things, and then I'll leave you be, which I've always tried to do. The first is that a woman I never met named you, and did a better job of raising you in 9 years than most manage in 20, and everything you are that is good you should lay at her door and not mine. The second is that the world does not get warmer on its own. It gets warmer only where somebody decides to be the warm part of it, on purpose, in the cold, when nobody's watching and there's nothing in it for them. You did that for a tired old man on a street corner when you had nothing left to give, and you have no idea, even now, what it saved. Be the warm part, Etta Doyle. You always were the warm part of mine. She is 41 years old now, the same age the store was on the day they met. She runs a small foundation out of a storefront on Barton Street, 2 doors down from where Halloran's used to be before it finally closed, and what the foundation does is find the children in this city who are sleeping where children should not have to sleep, on the buses, in the laundromats, in the stairwells, in the careful, watchful spaces between one adult who should have stopped and the next one who might, and it offers them, first and before anything else, a room with a door that bolts from the inside and a window that latches and a radiator that comes on an hour before they arrive. She did not name it after Everett, who would have hated it, and she did not name it after herself. She named it after a young woman from the North End, who drew her daughter a picture of a house with 2 windows and a dog in the yard, and told her the world was full of neighbors she hadn't met yet, and then ran out of winters before she could prove it. She calls it Colleen's house, and there is a lilac by the door. And the drawing hangs framed in the front hall where every cold child who comes through can see it. A little house with smoke coming out of the chimney, waiting for somebody to walk up and knock.